A very good evening and a warm welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Tomorrow, Monday, the 21st of June, is Father's Day, and we wanted to recognize fathers today and to just speak to some of them who double in a number of capacities. So I'll introduce my panelists for this evening's show. We have Hassan Sekajelo, who is from Men Engage. He's a father of three. We have Stephen Langa, who is the Executive Director of Family Life Network, who is a father of two and a grandfather of three. You don't look like it, Stephen. We've already told you that. And we have Timothy, who is the Executive Director of AfriChild. Timothy is a father of three Ugandans, we said. Oh, it's good to have you all on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. So, just to set the pace for our conversation, 3 days ago, the State of the World Fathers Report was launched, and I'll just read a very brief extract from when I checked it out, and then I'll ask each of you to speak to what that says to you from what your experience has been during the COVID-19 pandemic, which we're still in actually. So the State of the World's Fathers 2021 report, the fourth in the series, presents research on care work during the COVID-19 pandemic, focusing on structural barriers that prevent equitable distribution of caregiving between women and men. While data shows that men are participating more in care work during the pandemic, data also shows that the world is a long way off from achieving full equality in care work. The report provides 7 solutions from the individual to the structural level that need to be implemented to create a more care and gender equal world. So looking at that particular line where they say, they're speaking about research on care work during the COVID-19 pandemic and looking at men's participation, I wanted to hear from the three of you. Does this ring a bell to you? Have you seen it in the last year and in the many months of this pandemic? Hassan, I'll start with you. What have you seen as men engage in the last year and the months of COVID-19?
Thank you very much, Josephine. What we have seen in the past year, of course, it was a pandemic year. We have seen that, yes, men were at home, but men don't know how to stay at home. They were at home because of the lockdown, but we learned that men don't know how to stay at home. So men were forced to learn how to stay at home. And that got them, for fear of being idle at home, they just had to find themselves participating in care work. But even the care work they were participating in was not out of desire. And that's why the report is saying that there's still a long way to go to achieve this. It was a constricted care work for men. And yet we need to get to a time where we have 50-50 share of care work, where men see that it's part of their responsibility to be part of care work. So much as we have some glimpse, the report only shows us that it's possible. That's what the report shows. It's possible that we can get men into care work.
When you say care work, maybe you could give us examples of participation. If, for example, you've been participating in care work at home, because when we say care work, that's a word, that's an NGO term. You know, they want to know what do you mean by care work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we use the term care work, we mean men participating in work around the home. That is one, taking care of children, taking care of the sick, okay, if they are there, taking care of the elderly if they're there in the home. That men get to participate in this work. And taking care means what? For children, it could mean bathing the children, dressing them, making sure they are safe from harm when they go out and play. It means playing with the children, okay? If it's about the elderly, it means making sure they have eaten, they have washed their clothes are clean, ironed, and everything. This is what we mean by care work, men taking a part of care work. If it's about preparing meals, you're taking care that the family will have a meal to eat when time is due.
You speak so passionately, it feels like you're speaking from great experience. Timothy, I'd like to know what you saw during the pandemic and even now as it continues. What have you seen about men's participation in this period?
Okay, thank you. And I want to build on Hassan's submission that I think 100% concur with from the observations. The pandemic and indeed the lockdown that we experienced, I, was kind of unprecedented. So it was something new for many of us fathers. And we have a lot of these stereotypes about men and what role men play in a home. But with the pandemic, indeed, as I really like what Hassan said, men found it difficult and had to learn how to stay at home. But one of the other observations is that not all men were able to learn how to stay at home. There were those that kept, even during the pandemic, they would rather walk to a trading center and stay there standing and go back in the evening because they are programmed that I am supposed to go out, and if I sit home, it looks like there is a problem. But I think the other unfortunate experience of the pandemic was the aspect of relationships. Really learning how to relate, whether it was with their spouses or with their children, as Hassan said. We saw a spike in domestic violence during the pandemic, and the source of this was really this new enclosed environment. These men are used to getting up early and going and then coming back late. And now here they were confined, and then they had to deal with new experiences, and that unfortunately led to, in many cases, domestic violence, and also we saw a lot of violence also against children at the time. And so that I think for me was one of the negative highlights that emerged from it. But from the positive aspect, I think, as Hassan said, was a realization that many of us fathers, I think, got an opportunity to understand who are these children we call our children. How do they relate? What are their weaknesses? What are their strengths? What do they like? What they like? Because many times we are caught up in the rat race, running up and down, that you don't have time to actually understand who is my child. So that was, I think, one positive. And as relates to care work, indeed, I think it was almost, I think, as Hassan said, in some men who were open to adjusting were able to adjust and begin to see how they can actually support their partners. But those who were locked up in the ideology that I am not supposed to, I am the man, and because I am the man, I'm not supposed to get involved in this care work, as Hassan described it. I cannot change diapers, I'm not able to wash, I'm not able to cook. I think those are probably part of the reasons why we saw a spike in domestic violence, and that is still something I believe that as fathers we still have a lot of work to do regarding our role and responsibilities at home.
Dr. Stephen Langa, do you want to come in and just give us a brief on what it was like for you, what you observed during the lockdown?
Thank you very much, Josephine. For me, my observation really about COVID is that COVID just really helped to expose what was really happening inside. You see, when you squeeze an orange, then, the juice comes out. And so when COVID squeezed families, then it exposed what really was going on inside there. You see, you can hide bad things happening when everything is going on smoothly. But when a problem comes, that's when you see the rot that is down there. So actually, COVID came in and exposed the rot. Now, I have access to statistics that were done about 10 years ago around Kampala mainly. It wasn't widespread like the survey that you mentioned. And actually what it said that about 10% of fathers have fathered children and they're not even aware. There's a child somewhere which he fathered but is not aware. Of course, the lady is aware, but he's not. Then 40% of fathers have fathered children and have abandoned them. They know the child is there with that woman or whatever, but has chosen to deliberately abandon them. And then 45% are the ones who are staying with the children, are taking care, paying fees, food, and other kind of stuff, but don't connect emotionally with the children. And only 5% do care for the children and connect with the children. Now, I'm emphasizing that word connect, because that connection is very, very important, because studies show that if a father does not connect with their children, even if he's there, his presence is useless, if I can put in inverted commas. His presence is useless in terms of changing the narrative between them and an actual orphan. Meaning that when a father does not connect with the children, then those children are literally orphans. The statistics of things that happen to orphans actually happens to their children. So that means that that connection is very, very important. And for me, I want to bring balance here. What I want to say is that fathers need to understand their fatherhood responsibility. That's what they need to understand. When they understand their fatherhood responsibility, then really all these problems that we seem to be having, the domestic violence, the lack of care, all these things will be taken care of when the father take the responsibility. They're also serious.
About a survey, and you were speaking about what 40%, 5%, and so on. And I think people would be wondering, how was that survey conducted? How did they get to those figures? But also, since it's about 10 years ago, maybe I'm going to ask Timothy, because I know that you have a State of Uganda's Fathers Report that you're launching in a couple of days. So that should be like one of the latest with the latest figures. Maybe give us a sense of what is the state of Uganda's fathers at the moment, but also how do you conduct these surveys? How do you get the information? Do you go to fathers and hand out flyers and say, leaflets and say things, participate, or do you make phone calls? Who participates and how credible is that, so that it doesn't look like we are just pointing fingers at men and saying you're not doing your job?
So thank you very much, Josephine. And again, I want to start from where Stephen left off and say that the statistics that he has shared, although it is 10 years ago, the study he made reference to, it is not far off from a reflection of the current state of affairs. So not much has actually changed with regards to the state of fathers or the state of fatherhood in Uganda. And I would like to speak very quickly about the State of Uganda Fathers Report that we're going to launch in the next couple of days. Now, going directly to the question you asked, which is how do we actually do this research, and how do we do this? How do we come up with these conclusions? The State of the Fathers Report that we're going to launch is actually what we call a scoping study. And what we did was we got different research studies that have been done by different partners in the country, and we do an analysis of what the findings are. But I would like to also quickly point out that last year, and what really feeds into the study, is that we actually did primary data collection, which means we went and collected information from 5 districts: Kampala, Wakiso, Mbarara, Iganga, and Gulu. And we got the views from different, I'm trying to use a word that is not very NGO-like, but from different categories of people. I was going to say stakeholders, but let me say different categories of people. I think that is clearer. And so we speak to children and get children's views and hear, how are their fathers behaving? How do they define a father? Who is a father? We speak to mothers. We speak to the fathers themselves. We speak to teachers in schools, to opinion leaders in the districts. And that is how we gather this information. And then using this information, we're able to do analysis of these results and then come up with conclusions that tell us what is really happening, the state of affairs. So that is really the approach that we use. And we try, like, for example, I said that we were able to collect data from Kampala, Wakiso, Mbarara, Iganga, and Gulu. And so we have a bit of a regional representation. And once you have a regional representation, it gives you a snapshot of what the situation is in the country that we are in.
The report, Timothy, should we be worried? What are the key things that stand out that we need to pay attention to?
So the report, as I mentioned, speaks to a situation that is somewhat worrisome because it, first of all, acknowledges that many Ugandan male adults and sometimes some young men are actually fathers. In other words, they are biologically responsible for children, and that then gives them the title fathers. However, when you speak and use the term that Stephen used, which is fatherhood and the responsibility of fatherhood and the role that we are taking as fathers, there is a lot of neglect of our responsibility as fathers. There is also an understanding or a wrong understanding that fatherhood stops at provision. And so there is a lack of active, positive presence of fathers in the lives of families. And I'm using families, not just children. And so many of us fathers are fathers because we have biologically, given birth to children. But many of us, one, as Stephen noted, are not even aware of some of these children that we have fathered. Number two, where we are aware, many of us are neglecting our responsibility to actually play the role of fatherhood in the lives of these children. In fact, when you look at the police crime reports that are released annually, one of the biggest reported cases within the police stations is the issue of neglect. And this neglect is predominantly fathers and men. And so we have to translate, I think, from simply being male figures, I think, into fatherhood. And so we are far from it. And the findings of this report really speak to that and say that there is a lack of positive, active presence of men in the lives of families.
Thank you very much for that, Timothy. And I think the next segment that we're going to get into, we're going to speak about the opportunities that are there and how we can go beyond just, the situation that we have now and how we can make it better. So let's take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. We are coming to you from different locations, although I think Stephen is at a vacation at a resort somewhere while the rest of us are locked up
in the Bahamas.
That's right.
We certainly hope that
Virtual Bahamas. Yeah.
everybody out there is keeping safe and keeping in mind the SOPs that are set by the Ministry of Health and doing their best to keep COVID-19 at bay. We've seen very scary numbers out there, but we've also had experiences in our own homes that should tell us to be more alert and more careful. Gentlemen, we're speaking about fathers, and before we get into the opportunities that are out there and also looking at solutions for what I can clearly see are challenges from what you've all shared, let's look at the challenges for the families and the children with absentee fathers or fathers who are, I don't know if those also qualify for absentee fathers, the ones who are just providers but are not emotionally connected to their families. And I'll give that to you, Stephen, to start us off. What challenges are there?
Thank you very much, Josephine. Now, a child is meant to have both a father figure and a mother figure. Now, when the father figure is lacking, a lot of bad can actually happen to a child. Let's take, for example, girls. Girls who don't have a father figure crave for the attention of men. And sometimes they look for that attention in the wrong way and in the wrong places. That can explain some of the bad dressing or the provocative dressing which we see around. Some of that is also shown by the immorality, the level of immorality that is there. Incidentally, I do counseling as well. And sometimes girls or women give themselves to men thinking or subconsciously looking for a father figure. I have seen that happen. And for men, what happens is that when men don't have a father figure, they become very, very aggressive, and they, especially towards women, they think that manhood comes by oppressing women and being harsh to them and things like that. That is one of the ways, and that's why we see a lot of domestic violence. When we see things like defilement, we know that it's a big crime in this country. That defilement is a symptom of fatherlessness, of law, and this is even seen in the animal kingdom. For example, when elephants don't have a father figure, the young males are very destructive, both to the environment and to the herd. But when there's a father figure, they behave themselves, and things go well. So the same thing, when there are no father figures in a situation, lawlessness, the lawlessness we see in our country is a symptom of fatherlessness, because fathers bring authority, and people come to realize that, oh, there's an authority here, but when there's no father, you are your own authority. And that's why we see a lot of lawlessness. And we're seeing another thing that's beginning to rise in Uganda, that is the issue of gang culture. Gangs are beginning to, not only in urban areas, but now even in villages, gangs of young men are getting together and are wreaking havoc in villages. All those are symptoms of fatherlessness.
I'm going to turn to Hassan. At the beginning, you were speaking about care work, and I brought that question to you first. How best do you think fathers can be involved in care work and in family activities to prevent violence against children and to also prevent some of the challenges that Stephen has pointed out?
First and foremost, we need to demystify the social norms that keep men out of care work. The way we have grown up over the years have shown that this is not work for boys. This is work for women. And if we don't break that down, we will continue to churn out boys into men who believe that they don't participate in care work. We need to be strong on those social norms and keep them away, because one of the advantages of getting boys to participate in care work before they become men is that care work is not a house chore, it's not a burden. In care work, we are learning skills. Everybody out there, every male figure, every parent out there should take interest and make sure that boys and girls participate in care work, the way we defined care work at the beginning, because that's a skill, and you need this skill throughout your life. You need it. And then secondly, boys will do the things they saw male figures do around their home. That's how it is. That boys who participate in care work must have seen that being done when they were growing up. So we need to start with those that are soon to be parents. When we do our work, we are recruiting soon to be fathers, those who are already fathers, okay, like young fathers, one child, 2 children, those are young fathers. And then we have the older fathers, to make sure we are breaking the social norms and providing an equal space for boys and girls to play. We need to do workshops. For example, at Men Engage, we run what we call fathers groups. In these fathers groups, we recruit a cohort of 15 men, and these men, we work with them for a period of 12 weeks. At the end of the 12 weeks, we have transformed these men to be men who value participating in care work. Because if we don't do these workshops, most of us become fathers and learn fatherhood by socialization. That is all. And who says that whatever you learn through socialization is the correct thing? So we need to be able to support fathers, forming fathers groups, forming fathers workshops, so that we talk about these things. The more we talk about these things, the more we open up the space. But one thing we are learning, that even when you do fathers groups, you need to bring the spouses in. Because as these men transform to participate in care work, if the women do not understand, they will push them back. They will push them back and say, hey, this is the kitchen, is my space. What the hell are you doing in the kitchen? So we work with both of them such that the spouses appreciate the transformation of this man to get into care work so that all of them see the benefit of working together. I think if we do that, then we're helping men to get into care work and reap all the benefits that Langa has talked about, and also Timothy, of being active. You see, the word being active father is what we also need to explain when we say an active father, because when you go out there, the men think that if I work so hard and toil and put the money home, pay the fees, there's money for everything, I am an active father. Now we need to say, when we say active father, what is it that we mean? We mean the emotional connection between the father and the family members. Thank you very much.
You spoke about the soon-to-be fathers, the fathers, and then the older men in the family. And I'm going to bring in Timothy now because he's from AfriChild, because a part of me strongly believes that you get them when they're young, because I think it's harder to change men who are older, who grew up being served food, wombo nicely wrapped, and now you're telling him to go and take his own plate to the kitchen.
Prepare the room.
Yes, so I think getting them young is also a thing, and I'm wondering, Timothy, does AfriChild have any kinds of programs? Do you have any anything that you do that encourages younger children to also participate, but also encourages them to speak about the roles and how everybody can participate?
As he rightly said, the example that we set in the home is exactly what our children will do in the later part of their lives. And while he emphasized care work, which I believe, as we rightly said, is very important, I also wanted to take the angle of violence, that violence begets violence. And as he rightly said, it is hard to bend a tree which has already grown. And so once we, as fathers, are abusive, whether it is to our spouses, whether it is to our children, what we are doing is the socialization that Hassan spoke about, is we are training these people to think that this is the way life is and this is how it should be. So what happens is when I am a grown man and I am in my own house, I will very highly likely repeat what I have seen and what I have been socialized to do. And that then speaks to the question you asked about getting them young. And I think it's important that we begin to create this transformation in the lives of these young people, the children that we have. And what are the places and avenues for us to do this? I think it is very important that the places and the spaces where we have children, first of all, begin to appreciate the need for us to deconstruct these attitudes, perceptions, and norms that exist that actually perpetuate this negative behavior by male and consequently by fathers. We need to be able to, believe, engage, for example, with schools, because this is where our children are growing up. And it's important that our teachers, and this is part of the work that we are trying to do, engage with schools and teachers to begin to help them to appreciate the need for us to get the boys to begin to think differently. In the religious sites that we go to, whether it is the Christian sites, whether it is the Islamic sites, it is important because these are places that have influence over our children and how our children grow up. So it is important that we begin to inculcate these positive attributes, that it is okay for you as a boy to actually go and mop the house. It is okay for you to cook up a meal, and there's no problem with that. I grew up in a house where we were 5 boys. And what my mother did is she made sure that we had a timetable. You cook lunch and you cook supper at a certain time, you mop. So I grew up and I know how to do all these things. And I cook. And in fact, almost my role on Sunday is to cook. And I do it without any challenge. And this is what I'm training my sons to do. So,
Timothy,
yes.
when you spoke about schools, I just remembered that on Saturdays, now schools are closed now, but back then on Saturdays the girls would go and peel, and the boys would go for some extracurricular activity. So maybe they would go and play basketball or something while the girls peel, and then things like that. So it's good that you point out the schools. We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we will have the last bit of our show for tonight. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We are coming to you from our respective homes or locations, wherever those may be. We're still yet to figure out where one of us is actually coming to us from. But thank you for staying with us. As we close, I really just wanted us to look at the opportunities that are out there. I think we constantly have these conversations, but it's important to start looking at how to strengthen the role of fathers in ensuring that their children are well taken care of and that they are participating in that. How do we start to do that? How do the fathers come in? And I'm going to start with you, Stephen.
In our country now, and for the last decade or so, and around the world, there's been a big emphasis on the girl child. And the girl child is talked to, the girl child is given affirmative action. Even in parliament, we see, there's a specific constituency for women. Now, that is having a negative effect on the boy child and having a negative effect on the men, because now men are neglected and the boys are neglected. So the first thing is now to begin to take both children, both girls and boys, and talk to them as well. Because, as I said, the boy child has been. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to help sensitize the men about their role. Because you see now, because of the affirmative action and what is being done to women, which is legitimate and was started very well, because there was an abnormality where women are not given a fair chance, and that was okay. Now, what should have happened should have been to fix the abnormality or the anomaly. It should be fixed. But now what has happened is that the pendulum has come from one side, and instead of fixing, it has swung now to the other side.
All right, Hassan, do you want to...
Josephine?
Yes.
Yes, I have reservations on what Langa is saying about neglecting men. I don't think we can talk about neglecting men and boys in a patriarchal setting. I find that very difficult to take in. That in a patriarchal setting that we live in, that we are in, we can speak about men being neglected, we can speak about boys being neglected. I think we need to be a little bit careful as we analyze these issues, and depending on what angle you analyze them from. What I think that we need to be able to do is that we need to be able to educate men. We need to be able to educate men to understand what is their contribution. How can they be part of the solution? When we look at programming that he talked about that happened in Bulu, again, we have to continue as organizations to think, how do we make our programming more gender responsive, so that all the gender aspects and all the intersectionalities that come with our programming can be taken care of. But when we still have a patriarchal society, we can't be talking about men are neglected, and yet the patriarchal setup is saying men are on top and they are privileged and everything. But what is missing is that the education, women have got a lot more education in the empowerment programs, and they do understand these things. But we cannot say it is uhuru for women yet, because we still see marginalization in leadership, we still see marginalization in employment, even in the public sector and the private sector, we still see gender pay gaps. So there's a lot that we need to be able to look at and be able to work on. So for me, I would say that let's start by educating the men, and then we are able to get to that level.
Thank you very much, Hassan, for pointing out. I just wasn't as eloquent as you, but you managed to say what I was thinking in response to what Stephen had said. Yes, Timothy.
No, I wanted to. I actually got it a bit differently, and I think a bit of what Hassan was saying is actually my understanding of what Stephen was saying. I think maybe the words that were used did not reflect what Stephen meant when he says that women are more advantageous. I think um, the point is, if you're going to strengthen supply, then you want to strengthen demand. So if we are going to have, as we continue to do our work, and which I am a champion of, really, girl empowerment and women empowerment, we need to make sure that the men, as Sasson said, in terms of programming, are equally prepared on the receiving side. Because once you create an imbalance, that imbalance in itself is a source of conflict. And so race, we already have by default a patriarchal society that advantages men and boys over girls. We are trying to address this gap, but you cannot address this gap by doing anything or without engaging with the other group, because then in fact as somebody that's been in this development work where we have interventions in communities, that example that Stephen gave is a common example where as a result of some of the programming we do, we end up having a boomerang effect, because the men were not empowered enough to be able to deal with an empowered spouse or an empowered lady, and that in itself becomes a source of conflict. So I think definitely that is an area that we need to make sure that we address both ends of the spectrum.
Thank you, Timothy. I'm going to come back to you, Stephen, for your closing remarks. And in your closing remarks, just to speak to this question, how best can we ensure men's active and positive presence in their children's lives?
I think it's by education. Men need to be educated and to be sensitized about their role. And but that should begin right from the foundation, because, for me, I believe that foundation for anything is paramount. Men need to understand the source of manhood. Where do they derive their manhood from? Because it is from there that will inform their fatherhood, it will inform their being husbands, it will inform what they do and how they conduct themselves in a home situation. But if their source of manhood or their source of masculinity is not proper or is not from the right foundation, then we are going to end up with what we are ending up now. So I believe that education is important. Educating them the right information is very important. That's where the work is needed.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'll bring that question to you, Hassan, as well, as you make your closing remarks.
Yes, for me, we need to strengthen policy. And I'm very glad that government of Uganda is working on the family policy. We have not had that for many, many years since independence. So we need to get the right policies in place, get the right laws in place, because then the legal framework helps us to hold each other accountable when things have not gone well. But also, we need to be able to, all of us, work together to re-examine the meaning of being a man. Once we don't change that meaning, it becomes very difficult for us to shift men to become active fathers. So the current meaning of being a man is something that we need to have conversation around and agree to create a new identity for who a man is. Now, when we all agree on the right picture of who a man is, not the current one, because we have problems with the current definition of who a man is. Every society has a different definition. Once we agree on that one, then making men active fathers becomes work that is easy for us to do. Thank you very much.
I'm going to bring that question to you, Timothy, as well, in closing.
Thank you very much. And I definitely agree with both Stephen and Hassan. And I think that the other thing that we need to really bring to the men out there and is the consequences of our absence in the home. I think Stephen in the beginning articulated the consequences of not being, an active, present, and caring and involved in care work in the house. And I think we need to emphasize, we need people to understand that if I am not actively present in the life of my family, this is what it means. And I think that would also help change attitude, behavior. But I again go back to children. I believe that we need to target children right from the places where we have these children. In homes, we as parents, let's model positive behavior. Me as a father, Timothy, let me be a positive role model for my child so that he will grow up and say, this is how my father brought me up. This is what I saw him doing. So we have a responsibility to model positive behavior. I believe that we also need to bring more men into these conversations. We need to have more conversations about who a man is, as Hassan has said, and what is our responsibility as men. What must we do? A collective vision of what a man in Uganda and a father should be is a conversation we need to have.
As we close, I have a question, and I don't know who will answer it. Are the fathers of today still the fathers of the previous generation, where if the cow was entering the gate, everyone scatters? Is that the same picture we still have? And how do we get them in a room where they come in and their children are happy to see them, are going to sit with them? They're not the tough face that's going to make everybody run around and think of all your sins for the day. What do we do? Hassan?
Well, Josephine, the answer is yes and no. Because we still have fathers who are that type that you're talking about. When they are home, everybody disappears. Okay? Now, that is, like we have been discussing, that is a symptom of being a father from socialization. Okay? You have not had any other alternative way of being a father. What you saw your dad do is what you do, because that's the only way you know this is how a man behaves as a father. Okay? No, because so many things have changed. Of course, with education, there's so many changes that are happening, although the changes are too slow. Even when you look at if you compare the demographic health survey of 2006 and the one of 2011, you see that the change is there, but the change is too slow. Why? Because of the things, the unscripted rules that we continue to believe in, that in NGO world we call social norms. These things like, don't talk while I'm talking. It's not written in anywhere. It's not a law anywhere. But we have believed these things for so many years and continue to believe in them. Unless we start to challenge those things, then the progress of being a father, a welcome father, a loving father, will continue to have a slow pace. But I must acknowledge that things are changing.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Stephen, I saw you wanted to say something. I'll give you
Yes, I wanted to, yes. Thank you very much. I wanted to say that we have a training, since 2006, we have a training on parenting. And one of the things we teach is fatherhood. And we have taken fathers whose children actually do what you described. They will come home and everybody disappears. And I'm glad to report that we've trained them. They've changed. They've gone back. In fact, one father said that now there was a competition between him and the wife, because now when he comes home, all the children come to him, and they're really happy to meet with him and so on. So the long and short is that there is hope. And when people are given the information in a loving atmosphere, in a non-threatening atmosphere, they can change. And I think that's what we need to do. And I'm glad that we've been part of this, and I hope that we can continue this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It gives a bit of hope. I wanted to say Happy Father's Day in advance to the three of you and to all the men who are watching. I don't know how they celebrate Father's Day, but I hope in your own ways you're able to celebrate it, and that your children celebrate you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for the show. Please do keep safe wherever you are. To the three of you and to everybody that's watching, remember to keep in mind the COVID-19 SOPs, and not just keep them in mind, but action them. Wear your masks, sanitize, try to social distance as much as you can, and just keep safe. Please do that. The figures that we're looking at are quite scary. And even families, please promote it as much as you can for people to keep in mind how real the situation that COVID-19 presents us is and how much it affects all of us. Thank you for joining us for the show. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. And we've come to the end of it. Thank you for taking the time. Have a lovely evening. Coming up is the TV Weekend Edition.